Welcome. Thank you for joining us today at Conversations with Sandy and Manda. We put together these conversations because there are so many topics that we find really interesting. And what a wonderful thing to share them with you. Hopefully you'll have different points of view, some insight, and we hope that you find them helpful. I'm a grief coach and a grief coach trainer at Serenity. So what that means is that I work with adults who are grieving the death of someone they love. You might want to think about grief as that place that we're dropped off when we experience that loss, that profound pain. When we work together, it's as though we're walking arm to arm along a path through that grief into healing. As the pain heals, the love remains. And now I'd really like you to meet my friend, Manda.
Hello. Thank you, Sandy. What a wonderful introduction. My name is Manda Stack, and I am an intuitive coach and energy clearing specialist, which means that I help people feel better emotionally and spiritually, and even sometimes physically through the types of work that I do. We are all energetically connected, and the way that I work is by giving gentle energy clearings, which are powerful ways of shifting and resetting our energy. And I work with people easily, just like this, through video or phone, people all over. And again, my name is Manda Stack, and I'm really honored to be here today in this conversation and share it with you all.
And I'm so glad that we are joined by an amazing woman today, someone I'm proud and honored to call my friend. Jan McDaniel is a writer from the southeastern United States. She creates projects for survivors of traumatic loss, including suicide loss, through her website and her blog, A Way for Hope. And you can find that at wayforhope.weebly.com. We'll have the links at the bottom of this conversation. Jan is truly a remarkable woman, and here, forgive me, but I need to tell you a little bit about her from a personal point of view. Because when I first experienced my most profound grief, the suicide loss of my son, and I was along that path that we just talked about, Jan was one of those people that I felt, I swear, even as I think about it now, it's as though she put her arms around me and she held me for a long, long time and held my hand as we walked along that path, for which I will forever be grateful. And so, Jan, let's talk. How did you become a writer? More specifically, why did you choose to focus on healing after traumatic loss?
Well, Sandy, thank you, Amanda, for having me today. I was sort of born into a family of writers, and I did this. I started when I was about 6 years old, and it just was a love and kind of a compulsion. Not always a good thing, but it just seemed to come naturally. So I worked as a librarian, a newspaper reporter, and different things in connection with the written word. But when my husband died following several years of severe struggle with depression, I thought I would never write again. I thought my life was over. And kind of in the same way that you did, I reached out for the support of people who had been through this kind of experience before. And I found it to be very traumatic. But after a few years, as I began to heal, all along during that time, I began to write again. I started with some daily tips for the holidays for my online support group, the Alliance of Hope for Suicide Loss Survivors, which is really one of the best supports that I found. We have members from all over the world. And I started writing content material for the site and also forum posts. I became a community forum moderator and also contributed to the blog. But still, I felt like something was missing. So as the years went by, I wanted to reach out to people who had grief experiences, well, that weren't suicide. Those people too, but also people who had had traumatic loss or loss of a significant person in their lives from any means, because that just was the pull that I found. And I really feel like that this was a God thing, kind of an intuitive drive that has recently really taken off in directions where I can help my local grief share group, the local members of my church, as well as those who are survivors of suicide loss anywhere. So that really gives me extra healing as well.
Jan, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like you are being of great service in so many ways. And I'm curious about your own healing journey. And I'm so sorry for your loss of your husband. And I hear that it took a few years for you to kind of even start to write again. So I'd love for you to share a bit about your own healing journey.
Yes, thank you. Ron and I were so close. We were kind of old-fashioned. We raised our 2 children in the country and moved around a little bit throughout the Southeast as he moved from job to job. But as I started to grieve, it was as if that life was gone. And I speak of this journey in terms of years, although I feel like little tiny points of light and hope can reach us through other people, even from the very beginning. Now, we may not recognize that at the time, but when we get a little further out, we can look back and see the healing that has taken place. So that's kind of what I did. First, I could just barely breathe, and I was trying to reach out to other groups for support and found some wonderful groups, but it took a long time. One of the things I found that was helpful for me was to just stay in the present moment. I felt like the future, the past, that was just too much. I couldn't handle it. I was broken. And so I started having a little routine of a bedtime cup of herbal tea. And I used chamomile because it relaxed me a little bit. And it seemed like writing in my journal and having that cup of tea just felt healing. So from there, I continued to look for things that were healing. I even learned to swim after a lifetime of being afraid of the water. My doctor suggested I go to water aerobics because I needed to lose some weight. And that was a wonderful experience because it took me a little bit out of my grief. So I think the journey concept is very apt because you just take one step and then another and then another. And sometimes you fall back, which I did. I started to feel better, took on too much, and burned out a couple of times. I didn't learn the first time, but I was getting back to building a new life. Not that I wanted it at first, but now it's a life I really enjoy. And I think it's possible for anyone to find true healing and happiness again and still keep the love of that precious one in the life with you. So that's what I try to do every day.
Jan, that's beautiful. And there are a few things you said there that I have to say really resonated. I know you have 2 daughters and they've been along with you on this journey. And I'd like to hear a little bit about how the 3 of you have gone through this process together, because I'm sure it's different for everybody. But one of the things I hear you saying as you were further along, and on days you may not feel like you've made much progress, if you were able to look back you were able to see how far you had really come after all, that reflection. And then I also heard you say that what you found most helpful in those in times of incredible stress was really just focusing on this moment now, your breath, centering yourself, and not worrying too much about what happened or what might happen, but just taking care of this moment. So how does that work for the three of you? I'm sorry, how does that work for the three of you?
That's right. At the beginning, of course, I was just in shock and kind of out of it. My children took care of me. They were both in their 20s, but they had their own grief. And of course, they had each other, but each of them had a separate grief path. So what ended up happening was that the three of us followed our individual paths, and then we supported each other where and when we could as we grew stronger. That meant so much, even though, as one of my counselors said, they are not going to be able to help you with the loss of a spouse that you've lived your whole adult life with. They are grieving the loss of a father. And when I heard that, I realized that's true. They're going to have different needs. And sure enough, my need was to talk. And they did not have that need. They could not take so much of that. But when I realized that each of us would need to grieve separately, and I let up a little bit on the talking, they were there for me every time I needed them, as well as taking care of their own journey. So it's very important to realize each person is responsible for their own journey, but can be a support.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that everyone does have his or her unique way of grieving his journey. Now, you've mentioned so many wonderful ways that you learn to take care of yourself, going swimming, writing, joining groups, and being of service there. I'm wondering if there's any one particular resource that really stands out for you that helped get you through.
Yes, the support group meetings, whether in person or online, are really effective in helping. Along with that, the journaling has helped me so much, and there are actually many wonderful books. So just reaching out for support everywhere you can find it. And that's what I try to put on my website. I even have created some materials primarily because I couldn't find exactly what I wanted and needed. So I took a lot of that from my personal experience. And I have a group of journal prompts that I would like to give all of your viewers. It's just a PDF file, but there's one for each month in the year. So I hope this will be helpful to help people start that journaling.
Thank you, Jan. That's amazing. And the truth is, as someone who has really never been much for journaling, through the years, I have often used your prompts. I've seldom followed all of them, but they're there when I've needed them. I know, it's just, we are who we are. But I found them deeply meaningful and sincerely helpful because I knew they were there. And sometimes I think it's just knowing that there is a resource available and that would get me started. And I would find that very, very helpful. So I really appreciate that. I have another question of you. We're in this time of self-isolation. We're not able to do the face-to-face groups, although when you're grieving, sometimes your heart craves so much to have someone right next to you all the time. How are you seeing people grieving through this time of much more self-isolation? Are you seeing differences? And how do you suggest we support people more effectively? And how do you suggest we take care of ourselves better through this?
Yes, self-care is very important, but when you are isolated like this, because grief is isolating, even at the best of times, it becomes important to surround yourself with what you need. Some groups are using Zoom meetings such as this, where they can chat and use materials, and that's wonderful. Um, some of us who are older and have existing health conditions, we can't even see our nearby relatives or give hugs to those grandchildren for a while because we're trying to protect our health and theirs. So it really is a problem. And I've seen so many different ways people are coping, from really getting depressed and anxious, which that means it's time to seek out help for that. And we do have telehealth counseling available now. A lot of the pharmacies, doctor's offices, they're offering online consultations. But we do have groups like the Alliance that will still continue because they are online. But I've also seen people getting creative, the gardening, the crafts, sewing, even if it's making masks for themselves or for their health professionals in their area, or just coming up with wonderful ways to help people, parents who are at home and trying to, in many cases, work from home and school their children because schools are closed. So trying to, especially if you're not used to teaching, this is an added strain. But there are resources out there. I've found some of the great homeschool groups are offering a lot of free resources from their websites and email lists for anybody to join. And then I've seen on the Alliance how someone can feel pretty isolated and anxious, and yet talking or sharing some of those projects really helps them get started in baking bread, or just cleaning out the closet for later donations. That gives them a good feeling of not being so claustrophobic and cluttered. So anything like that is helping.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was a great overview. For those who are grieving a loss going into this time of the pandemic, there are many layers here, and you offer some excellent ways for people to reach out and get support. Thank you. I wanted to, as we're wrapping up here, thank you. This is your journal prompt, a prompt a month, and this will be available for anyone who wants to download it. And I just wanted to share, I am a journaler, so I'm looking forward to using some of these. And I just want to read the one for May, which seems very timely. This is it. You are very special. Remember how much God cares for you by taking care of yourself. What do you need right now? A nap? A good dinner? More exercise? Treat your body kindly. Grieving is difficult work. And then the prompt is this: I will care for myself by, and then fill in the blank and journal away. So thank you for this on behalf of myself and our listeners. And I invite you to share a bit more about what we can find on your website.
Okay. I hope these things will be helpful. They are certainly experience-based. And so many of the materials that survivors of all kinds share are things that have helped them, that they learn. On my website, I have a little section on the resources page called How to Survive Traumatic Loss. And there you can find things like the journal prompts, that's one of them. And you can find short little guidebook for getting through holidays throughout the year. Holidays and special days are pretty tough for people who are grieving. And sometimes even the COVID virus doesn't affect people as much because they're so numb and in so much pain in their personal situation. But to have guidelines like these valuable resources, there's one on self-care, one on helping your children get through grief, which can also be used with COVID-19 experience, because there's a lot of grief there. We've lost our normal routine, our normal connections, and just how we go to school and play with friends and everything. And I also shared on that page resources that are other groups that I found helpful on my journey, and a little craft project that I don't know, I think I made it up. Somebody else may have too, but making a life bracelet with little gemstones or beads, and just kind of a way to look back. There have been dark days. I put some dark stones in my bracelet, and you can see a picture there. But overall, I had a lot of beautiful greens, blues, and whites, and for the good days. So I think having something to touch like that, even the little hope charms that I put on the bracelet, you can order those. And I think that helps us in a moment of despair to look at that and say, oh, I'm not alone, and I can get through this time.
That's wonderful. I'm so grateful you were able to join us here today, Jan. And I hope all of you that are watching this will join this conversation. Tell us what you think. How do you feel? What have you found helpful? And how can we help one another moving forward? You'll find links for Jan below this. And I'm Sandy Walden. You can find me at sandywalden.com. And Manda?
And I'm Manda Stack. You can find me at mydivineintuition.com. Thank you, Jan, for a really rich conversation.
You're welcome.